Yeah, I've joked about like going to Ireland again and like using my citizenship and getting out, but I would never do that because the fight goes on. Um, you can't just give up because someone like Trump gets in there. You have to make his presidency hell or his leadership hell every single day and cause, as is quoted in the Democratic Party, some good trouble. I think that's where I see myself and a lot of other young folks in the political system, where it's like, you know, it's not we have to approach a possible Trump victory with, yeah, this is really bad. And a lot of bad can happen from this, but it doesn't mean we give up and it's not the end of the world. We have to keep fighting for what's right and for what we believe in. And I hope to just be part of that in whatever form that takes.
Very pleased to be joined on this episode of The Warning by Harry Sisson. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you for having me on. It's good to be with you.
So, we're going to talk about how you see the world, which is different than how all people your age see the world, which I'm sure when you do media appearances, right, you get asked a lot to answer questions through the prism of spokesperson for the generations. But let me ask you this to start off. What attracted you towards being engaged in politics?
It all kind of surrounded the 2016 election. I was like, 15 at the time. And I was seeing how dangerous Trump is, how dangerous his rhetoric was, and how that stuff really
I'm gonna
matters.
I'm gonna stop you. Let me dangerous. You're 15.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the word dangerous. Where
Meaning,
did you grow up?
so I was living in Ireland at the time. I grew up in pretty much Dublin. I was there from maybe like 6 years old onwards until I left when I was 15 back to the United States. But I was born in Singapore. So I've kind of been all over the world. Um, but I mean, dangerous in the sense that this guy was extremely hateful, the way he bullies people, the way he targets minorities. Even me at 15 years old can look at that and look at the people impacted and be like, this is a man who poses a threat to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. He poses a threat to everybody, our country as a whole. And looking back on it, it wasn't even the beginning of the Trump's terror and his reign. There's so much more later that happened that, as we know with January 6th of the 2020 election, all the criminal charges against him, like the 2016 was just the beginning.
I want to stay in this space with you because I'm genuinely curious about it, and I talk about it. I write about it a lot of time. This is the story of Winston Churchill, for example,
Hmm.
in the 1930s. He later talked about the Second World War as being appropriately named in his view. It could have been named the unnecessary war um, because of the appeasements, right? He saw the danger coming. There are people today who look at Trump and see no danger.
Hmm.
So you're 15, you are outside of the country, you hear what he says, and your instinct when you hear it is that it's wrong. But it being wrong or even malicious is different than it being dangerous. Or
Hmm.
are those things the same in your
I think that
kind
when
of
you're,
emotional understanding of what that word means, an intellectual understanding
yeah,
of what it means? But I want you to think deeper about dangerous. He struck you as dangerous. In what sense? That he could hurt people's feelings with name calling, he could do something worse. You had an understanding at 15 of a historical sensibility that a lot of United States senators apparently don't have. That's what I'm trying to get you to talk a
hmm,
little more deeply about.
yeah. So to your question about, you know, malicious being different than dangerous, in many cases, yes. But when you're running to be the president of the United States, Words matter. So when you're demonizing certain groups, not only is that malicious, but it is dangerous because those groups will now be targeted by your party, by your followers, all the way across on the right spectrum. So that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean when I'm saying it's dangerous because he had such a platform and such an influence, and we saw it take place. We saw, when he got into office, the Muslim ban, hate crimes spiked under Trump's presidency. I would argue that was directly tied to him and his rhetoric. And so at 15 years old, looking at this man demonize Muslims, Hispanics, women, you could see it from a mile away. That not only is it just malicious and wrong, and it's a bad way to talk about somebody, but it is dangerous. It posed a threat to those specific groups he talked about, but as we see now, to the broader country.
What do you think is broken in the society that overwhelmingly the political leadership of one of the two parties in the country, simultaneous to your epiphany about the danger and having a deep understanding about it, says nothing here?
I could talk about, what's broken for so long. I think a variety of things are broken in the United States, but I think fundamentally right now, if I had to put it on one thing, one institution, I fundamentally believe that the Republican Party is broken. Their leaders, a lot of their followers, members of Congress, candidates, they're all broken in the sense that they no longer put the country and the people first. They are putting themselves, their interests, and Donald Trump first. And when you have a political party who is no longer putting policy and actually getting stuff done at the forefront of their minds, and instead loyalty to one man, that is a problem. And that affects the entire country. It affects our government, our institutions in the government, even agencies of which are not political inherently. You see this with the targets on the FBI, the DOJ, whatever it might be. If I had to put it on one thing, I would put it there. And it's their own doing. And they continue to do it regardless of the warning signs, regardless of the historical precedent. I think there are a lot of parallels, not exacts, but parallels between now and kind of the rise of fascism in 1940s Europe.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of parallels. A lot of parallels. Who are the three political leaders that have inspired you thus far in your life?
It's a great question. I think, at least elected leaders, I think I'd have to go with Speaker Pelosi, President Obama, and President Biden, all for different reasons. Speaker Pelosi has such a long and storied career, fighting specifically back against, in her early career, the sexism and being the Speaker of the House and achieving so much. President Obama, I just think he's such an incredibly smart man who thinks deeply about the issues and, again, fought back against his own stereotypes in his own right, started in many ways by Trump with the birther movement or just general racism that was bred from the Tea Party. But, at least now today, I think President Biden is such an inspiration, not just because of his politics, but because of who he is. I think that, being a young senator and having your wife and child die in a car crash and he's spoken extensively about the depression he felt and being able to go on and serve your country and, go back and forth from Delaware every day to make sure that he's tucking his kids in bed at night and waking up and making them breakfast before heading off to DC. And then continuing to serve, becoming vice president, having your son die to brain cancer, and continuing to feel a call to action, a call to service, and answering that call and stepping up in, one of the most pivotal elections in modern American history, maybe in American history, is remarkable. And I agree with his politics, but him as a man and the way I've seen him treat people is very inspiring. I think he is kind of the leader I'd like to see in this country more often.
When you look at that quality of fortitude, do you see that anywhere else?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of leaders in the Democratic Party, members of Congress, but even so, people on the ground. It's not just the elected officials who make the party churn and make the country move forward. It's the people who are going door to door. It's the campaign staff who are working behind the scenes and doing these grueling hours, especially during election season. Um, there's a lot of fortitude to go around. There's certainly, you can see it in individuals, but I'm not sure if it's just like an individual characteristic when we're talking about politics. I think it can be applied to a variety of people and kind of movements within a party. And I think you're seeing that, right now in the Democratic Party and politics generally, with women rising to the moment, with, the attacks on their bodies, or even just rising to the attacks on democracy, standing up and saying, hey, this is not quote unquote a sexy issue. It's not like an economy issue, which historically has been very easy to run on and very successful, but it is an important issue. And we have to stand up for it and not shy away from calling it out. So I think there's a lot to go around.
Stepping outside of the contemporary, who are three people that you find inspiring in history, politics, society, the culture, that have meaning to you in the current sense?
Yeah. I think like FDR, I just his presidency as a whole with the New Deal, and then also simultaneously with World War II, kind of just a historic presidency. Um, I think someone who's also very inspiring to me is Martin Luther King. I've studied his speeches extensively, and the March on Washington is just such a powerful event. And when you look back on the entire speech and that entire day of hundreds of thousands of people being in DC, that it's not all he's done, but it's kind of like a summary of the impact he had on the country. Um, and I also think like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to me, from a legal perspective, she had some comments and rulings in her career that I disagreed with, but overall she pioneered this movement of women's rights, which had started long before her with women's suffrage and just general equality in society. But having that on the Supreme Court, and her not being the first woman, but having that on the Supreme Court, a very notable legal voice, is remarkable to me. And I wish she were still around on the court.
Let's get into that. I don't think you mean that,
Interesting.
right? She would be how old?
I mean, I was more saying it aside from the age. Like, I wish her embodiment on the court was still there. She would be old. I don't have no idea what age she would be now, but you know.
So I was talking to my friend James Carville, who was who's beside himself, along with 80% of the country, on the choice at hand,
Hmm.
right? That don't like it, and just put that in the box. But what James says, right? He's in disbelief on. He is. I was 16 in 1960 when John Kennedy came, right? Inspired me. He's like, it's like the equivalent. Biden's the equivalent in 1960 if Al Smith came, who was the nominee in 1928. He was born in 1874. And I go, John Kennedy was so inspiring that he inspired Dick Cheney, right? He was inspiring people who completely disagreed with everything he said, right? He's right about the service. He's right about being involved. He was incandescent in that way, like drawing people into this. So all of these issues that you have a passion for, right? And actuaries say tremendous chance that you will live into the early years of the 22nd century. Ruth Bader Ginsburg spends her whole life fighting, an advocate, rising to be a Supreme Court justice. But and there's no other way to say it, lacks a humility, a restraint, uh, wisdom that says everybody has to hang it up. And so there's a consequence for Ruth Bader Ginsburg not doing that, that impacts you profoundly.
Mm.
And I just wonder how you think about that and how you think about it in the context of the president who you really admire. I am crazed about this as a Generation Xer, right? People my age are crazed about it. We get together. It doesn't matter what party you're in. It drives us nuts. You would think, right, it would matter more to a generation behind us intuitively, but I'm not sure that's the case. It may matter a lot less. And I'd just love to hear you talk and react to what I just said and what you think about that, right? When, are you excited, right, for the switchback where we see some younger people in this?
So, the polls would agree with you, of this age issue specifically in the election driving people crazy. Now, to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the last comment I'll make is that, yeah, her not stepping down when many people were asking her to, even President Obama, was poor decision making. And hindsight is 2020. I really wish that in hindsight, of course, that she would have stepped down. We would have been able to fill that seat, hopefully. Republicans are iffy on that. And, maybe the court, maybe the country would look different today. But that's not the case. And I guess when I talk about admiring Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's more of, how she consistently responded to these conservative justices during arguments. She was very firm with them. And I think let little get by her and kind of stood up for what's right in many of these cases. But you're right; it is a unfortunate ending to a storied career. But when it comes to Biden and the age, I have no problem, and I mean that. I have no problem. I'm 21. He's like 60 years older than me. I have no problem with him running and being the next president of the United States and serving out his 8 years for a variety of reasons.
Imagine Trump wins. Trump is elected.
God forbid, yes.
Okay. It's January 20th, 2025. Hail to the Chief has just played. Salute has gone off. He's back. He's back. Democracy doesn't get turned off in the country like a light switch.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to disappear. The Gestapo won't materialize in your living room.
That's right.
Which is not to say that anybody out there with a brain shouldn't be completely prepared for lots of catastrophic events, right, to happen. But how do you see that? How do you think about it? How do your friends think about it? Do you have a lot of friends that are like, whatever, I'm working, for the bank, I'm working here, I'm doing, it doesn't, they're both old guys. They're like, take me inside your group, your friend circle, right? Not just the politics that you believe in about that this guy wins.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that like my way of thinking about it is, of course, very much different than my average friend. As I mentioned, like the topic of democracy is not a flashy one. It's not one that I encounter a lot among my generation, those of which who are not involved. If you're even slightly involved in politics, whatever age you are, you know about it. You know the threats that it poses. the historical precedent that makes this so scary. But if so my average friend is not really in tune to the democracy question. But and I kind of try to explain to them, like, to respond to your question of how do I think about it, it's like, yeah, democracy is not going to be destroyed the minute that Donald Trump is sworn in. He walks back to the White House and you can't ever vote again. No, it's going to be slow. And as I was reading this book recently called Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson, and she talks about how most dictators are elected democratically. Hitler was elected democratically, and then they go in and kind of attack the institutions and scrape away at them. And that's what Trump did for 4 years, and that's what he's going to continue to do. We already hear about it. We already hear that he is, and him and his allied groups are vetting 50,000 public servants to serve in these different agencies, all these three-letter agencies, DOJ, FBI, EPA, whatever it is. And these people are not, the qualification they're surveying for is not whether they're good at the job, whether they'd be a good public servant. It's whether they're loyal to Trump. So when you have all these public agencies, a lot of them answering to Trump, that's a fundamental institutions that are no longer in the eyes of the people. They're in the eyes of Donald Trump. Then you have Congress, where you have these MAGA lunatics, these Marjorie Taylor Greens, who just do his bidding. No matter what it is, what topic it is, they will align with him, no matter what. And when you don't have this kind of departure from the majority party, even when they're doing something wrong, especially, that's really bad. And then what happens when Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito decide they want to step down during Donald Trump so he gets 2 more Supreme Court justices who are young, healthy, and will stay on the court for the next 30, 40 years? And on top of that, he appointed dozens of judges during his term who were rated unqualified by the American Bar Association, a nonpartisan group. So when you have judges answering it to him, members of Congress answering to him, these 3-letter agencies who do his bidding, maybe even go after political opponents, that's how democracy crumbles. And it's not going to be overnight. But for 4 years, he's going to do everything he can to make sure it happens.
Does it frighten you?
Yes. Yes.
Does it frighten your friends?
I don't think that a lot of the people I talk to really appreciate how close to a reality that could be. I say something like that, they think it's so far off. They say it never happens in America.
What frightens you about it?
The democracy that we hold dear, whether it's a Democrat or Republican being attacked in that manner, is a recipe for disaster for the country. There's no going back. There's no just flipping a switch and we can get back to the democratic institutions we hold dear. That hasn't worked in a lot of different countries. It took a disastrous event, mass casualty in many cases, for the people to be like, you know what, I kind of want to pick my leaders again. And I don't even want to test that in the United States. And again, I just think researching these different dictators in history, and as I mentioned earlier, seeing the parallels, I really, truly, fundamentally believe that we are not that far away with the right people elected from being no longer democracy. Who knows what we become following that? Depends on who's at the helm, whether it's religious institutions or just Trump himself. But we are not that far away, in my view. And that's pretty scary to me.
Where do you see yourself in that struggle, in that fight? Let's say he wins.
Yeah, I've joked about going to Ireland again and using my citizenship and getting out, but I would never do that because the fight goes on. You can't just give up because someone like Trump gets in there. You have to make his presidency hell or his leadership hell every single day and cause, as is quoted in the Democratic Party, some good trouble. I think that's where I see myself and a lot of other young folks in the political system, where it's it's not. We have to approach a possible Trump victory with, yeah, this is really bad, and a lot of bad can happen from this, but it doesn't mean we give up and it's not the end of the world. We have to keep fighting for what's right and for what we believe in. And I hope to just be part of that in whatever form that takes. It's kind of hard to say where the country will be in a year from now. That could be working on campaigns, working for members of Congress. I don't know what that looks like, but hopefully it's very much still involved.
You have a lot of TikTok followers. What talk to me about TikTok?
Yeah. What
Is
about
it a
it? What do you want to
danger?
know?
Is it a
Ah,
danger?
ah, uh, not in my view. Not in my view. At least I'm always of the view that if, I see evidence, strong evidence, as presented by our intelligence community that says that TikTok is a danger, it's a threat, it's currently being used to hurt Americans or gather data illegally, then I'm open to that. But right now, I've just not seen that evidence. I think that, trying to specifically target TikTok right now is bad policy and bad politics. I think if we're concerned about data, as is kind of the central question in the TikTok conversation, then let's pass a data bill. Let's make sure that all social media companies aren't selling our data off to places that we don't want them to, or illegally even gathering our data, as opposed to targeting one app. Because is it okay when an American company does it and then sells it abroad? I don't think so.
What about the idea that this is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party? You have a
Uh,
hole in your head if you don't believe that's true. We have an entire generation who is addicted, could be a word, enthralled to, invested in, informed by, something controlled by what on any moment could become a hostile foreign power and already is if you listen to the rhetoric, from some leaders of both parties. What is the response to that?
um, again, like, there's this conversation that, the CCP controls it and they're altering it. I would love to just see some evidence for that claim. That's where I'm at. I mean, again, I'm not one who will be blind, and I'm not MAGA. I won't just, I like this thing, so no matter what it does wrong, I'll like it no matter what. If there is actual evidence and um, verifiable evidence that TikTok is being controlled by the CCP and that they're specifically altering the algorithm to get people addicted or to push narratives that they want to push, I'm there. Let's talk. Let's have that conversation. Let's get either a sale or a ban. Um, but right now, I just don't see it, and I think that there are legal problems as well. First Amendment concerns that might be risen with a possible ban, and I'm sure you're going to see litigation in that kind of that area. But um, yeah, if people out there, if the intelligence agencies want to, publish a report where they have all their findings on how it's being controlled, I'll read it front to back.
When you kind of look down the road into the future with the tech companies and you think about, for example, Zuckerberg and Meta and the glasses or the new
Yeah.
Apple glasses, is that something that excites you? That we're
Uh,
gonna have this as a work tool,
yeah. I,
relaxation tool, or are you like, oh man, no, no, bad?
I'm on kind of both sides. I think like it can be good for, getting, as you mentioned, like work done. I even envision a future where, surgeons can have certain goggles on and they can get information about the surgeries they're performing. Um, I think that's reasonable. I think you're not that far away. But then the negative is like, are we gonna in 10 years have everybody walking down the street with a headset on and looking ridiculous? And it kind of and never being able to unplug because is it part of day-to-day life as our phones are now? I don't know. It excites me and it's makes me a little worried. Not because I think there's going to be like robots taking over the world, but I just wonder what society looks like with this rapid development in 20 years.
You talked about the fact that you've had some expatriate experiences, Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
Singapore. Talk about that and its impact on you at age 21, how you think it helps you see your country a bit differently from, I think, both people your age, but also people probably double your age.
I've always said I've been incredibly thankful and grateful for growing up abroad, because it really shaped who I am today. It subjected to me to different cultures, communities, people, many people I would have never met in my entire life who just, live in a different way than I do, see the world differently than I do. And growing up with people of, again, different backgrounds, different races, different origins, really gives you a different perspective. Uh, and kind of growing up in Ireland, I was very independent. I was like walking the streets of Dublin at 13 because that's just kind of the culture of the city. And getting that experience so young, that independence and that sort of Irish culture of being on your own a little bit in that sense, I value it. I think it matured me quicker than, if I were growing up in the United States in like your typical suburban neighborhood. And then when I came to the United States, I had this massive culture shock. This massive culture shock because um, it's just different. It's just like I think like individual communities in the United States, these neighborhoods where like in the suburbs of big city are very cliquey. They are um, it's of course comparing the suburbs to the city, but they have entirely different interests than those folks in Ireland. I was waking up every day like wondering what the soccer scores were. They were talking to me about the NFL, which I hadn't really watched until I really got ingrained in American culture. Um, so it's just different. It's just different, and you would have never, if I would have grown up in the United States, born here and raised here, I would have never been experienced or been subjected to these cultures and these people, but I was, and I'm just thankful for that to this day.
When you look at this campaign right now, I had a conversation with Katie Couric, and one of the strategic realities is if you're running the campaign, right, and you're in the room and we're having the meeting, and you're listening to people talk, and as you go through life and you'll be in these meetings and you'll have to learn the quality of restraint, right, as people speak and lay out a theory of the case that you think is a suicide charge. And so the point that Katie Couric was making is that if you withhold access, right, this is a commodity, right? With less of the access does what with the price of the access, right? It raises the stakes, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and by the way, you don't have to be a particle physicist to figure this out, right?
Yeah. You don't have
This
to be
is
solving Einstein's equations,
right. This
Yeah.
is walk around in Dublin at age 13 by yourself,
Yeah.
right? You will come to some certain inimical conclusions, right, about
Yeah.
human nature, basic physics. I, I think that he needs to be much more present. Um, he needs to walk out somewhere at 10 in the morning. All he has to say is Trump reminds me of a guy my dad knew down at the bar. Let me tell you the story. He used to be able to deliver a joke in the morning, a serious point in the afternoon, and a summary in the early evening that will be an organizing coagulant, a convening authority for the realm of sanity, if you will, which is the field on which we have to run this campaign. What do you think about the cloistered strategy, about um the hey, we got this? Um, James Carville, James Carville loves the Democratic Party like it's a child. He's one of the great Democrats in history. He loves it.
Yeah.
Loves it.
Yeah.
And, somebody was asked, so what would you say to James Carville if you were in the campaign? I said, I would listen to James. I would listen to James.
Right.
Right. So what do you think? Because people I am worried this idea that, hey, you don't have to debate. Trump is beneath his dignity. No way. We live this. There's a reason Yellowstone, right, is iconic in the culture. There's a reason we have Westerns. There's going to be a showdown
Yeah.
on the debate stage. This is America.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder how you see the engagement, the fight, because the strategy is deeply deficient to me.
Yeah. So to start, I agree. I'm not a fan of the kind of conservative, keep him away kind of strategy of which, we're getting reports that maybe his people close to him agree with, but he himself does not. I kind of look at the 2024 election as if you're fighting Mike Tyson, right? And the winner of that fight, the boxing match, gets to take the democracy. Now, if you're fighting Mike Tyson, do you think it's an effective strategy just like put up your guard the entire time and hope to not get hit? No, you're going to get hit. It's Mike Tyson, right? You're going to get hit. He's going to hit you with something that's going to hurt. So you got to fight back. You got to be willing to throw some punches and get a little dirty here and there, and defend yourself, but also go on the offensive. And right now, I view the Biden campaign at no necessarily fault of any one individual as a little too putting their guard up and hoping that they can get through and win by putting their guard up. You got to go on the offensive. You got to get him out there. His State of the Union was fantastic. His following appearances in swing states has been fantastic. And when you let Joe be Joe, you win. He was Joe in 2020. He got out there and talked to people individually. I think it's a big part of why he won the election. You saw his compassion on display every single interaction. And that resonates with people, not only on an individual level with the person you're talking to, but also it's the age of social media. These clips go everywhere. You're not just touching the heart of one, you're touching the heart of millions. So let Joe be Joe, get him out there. And as you mentioned, hit he's a funny guy. Let him joke about Trump. He's gonna gaff. He does so in his career. We'll deal with that later. Get him out there. Let him hit Trump as he has in these recent fundraisers. And as you mentioned, allow him to have these serious conversation later at night. These bigger summaries and later at night. The general conversation in the afternoon, and have these jokes in the morning. I love the way you put it. I think that's a great strategy. So yes, I agree.
Are you more optimistic or pessimistic over the next 10 years?
I think it's largely dependent on what happens in 2024. But I think at this moment in time, right now, I'm far more optimistic than pessimistic. And maybe I'm delusional. I acknowledge that. But maybe I'm delusional. Maybe I'm out of my mind. But I'm, looking at my generation being engaged for the most part, standing up for what's right, uh, and putting aside differences to pursue good over evil. That gives me a lot of hope. And it's also really encouraging to see even folks in older generations getting involved as well and supporting younger and vice versa, because it's really going to take all of us. It's not going to take one generation, one demographic. It's really not only 2024 and beyond. It's going to take all of us to keep this country on track and keep fighting for good. So that alone makes me very optimistic. But then again, that could come crumbling down in 9 months. So,
Last question.
yeah.
What is the biggest misconception about your generation that you hear politicians stereotype you with?
um, I there's so many. There's so many. It's hard to pick one, but I think that specifically from the conservative side of the aisle, a lot of them think we're stupid. They think we're just like these dancing Gen Zers on TikTok who come up with these silly trends of like eating Tide Pods and things of that nature, uh, and I'm just always so baffled by that belief because I talk to so many young people who are just mind-blowingly smart, light years ahead of me, so much smarter than me, and I learn from them every single day. And they are, again, people from all walks of life. They're the person studying to be a doctor, and then the person who's in trade school to be a plumber. And I just hear it from people across the entire country. and again, different backgrounds. And, of course, there are some exceptions to every rule. There are people in my generation who do eat Tide Pods, but that's not all of us. And a lot of people are very informed and very involved and very smart.
What about on the left?
On the left, in terms of what quality? Smart, moral?
In terms of the biggest misconception about you?
Okay. Um, I think we're seeing this right now, especially with everything that's happening in the Middle East. But there is this belief that I strongly disagree with, that my generation is like really far left. Young people in the Democratic Party who are in politics are very far left. There, some people on the right describe them as communist, socialist, whatever buzzword they're using that day. I think there are a lot of people who are, and a lot of people who tend to maybe go farther to the left than your average person. But your average American I'm talking to is my age, who's just like, yeah, I just want to be able to control my own body. Yeah, I want access to medicine. Yeah, I don't want my climate or my earth to be on fire in 100 years because of climate change. They're not thinking about like, we got to arm the proletariat and take over the rich class, all this. No, it's like, I think that's the biggest misconception about young people in the Democratic Party.
Great place to leave it. Harry Sisson does not want to arm the proletariat. You heard it here on the Warning First, because I think that hopefully someday his name will be on a ballot. In a serious way, and I mean this, you can't help but feel optimistic if you get to spend 45 minutes to an hour talking to you. Real pleasure having you on the Warning.
Well, likewise, man. You blow me away. You're very smart, and I appreciate the opportunity and hope we chat in the future at some point.
You bet. Thank you, Harry. Thank you for listening to my political commentary. If you like what you heard today, please also consider subscribing to The Warning daily newsletter on Substack.